Before I start talking about the main topic of this video, let me just preface that I don't think Hollow Knight was my first ever Metroidvania. That title goes to a game whose name I do not remember anymore. All that remains are glimpses of memories. Maybe you can help me find that game. If I recall correctly, it was a 2D browser game in which the player character loses their wings and falls down from clouds or sky. As you explore the landscape, you get new abilities, much like in any Metroidvania I suppose, and eventually you also get the wings to fly back up. Hollow Knight does not start you with any game powers. In fact, you cannot even dash at the start of the game. You only have your trusty nail and the ability to attack with it. And boy, you can do a lot with just that. Like pogoing on spikes. Anyways, the learning curve is gradual, and you have time to get adjusted to the keybinds. The same perk also applies to how the player is gradually introduced to their character's customization options. In Hollow Knight, you can discover charms which give unique stat bonuses and are a de facto implementation of hybrid classes. Be it soul-related charms to play like a mage, extra blue health points for some tanky gameplay when healing is not an option, or the White Palace endless soul generation build for surviving the soul blades. What I love about the charm system is that while there are definitely some that are generally stronger than the others, the variance in game's challenges in form of gauntlet rooms and bosses encouraged me to experiment, and I actually got rewarded for doing so. For example, I had an insanely tough time defeating the Lost King Dream boss. Also, not upgrading my nail up to that point did not make the fight easier, but with some trial and error, I found the charm combination that I would not have used otherwise, and I overcame the challenge. I think I used the spiderlings with the spore clouds or something else to mostly combat the flying balloon things. In general, the way dream bosses are handled is also something I quite appreciate. Not having to do any long runbacks or worrying about losing money is awesome from time to time. Obviously, I also find the usual style of having to traverse the path from the bench to the last death area to be okay, and even immersive, having recently finished my first Dark Souls trilogy playthrough. But the whole concept of having a more difficult variant of a boss you can just instantly retry after defeating the real or the current version I find to be awesome. On the note of Dark Souls, Hollow Knight offers a slightly different approach to regaining lost currency. And even though you kinda have to fight an enemy to get it back, I would say it is less difficult than Dark Souls, because you can sometimes safely pull it from the boss arena, and you even have the option of using Rancid Eggs to summon the shade in the hub area of the world. When talking about currency, the only mechanic I have gripe with is that you can lose it to spikes and other environmental hazards if you don't pick it up, which is sometimes impossible. Now, I don't like grinding, so I basically went the entire game with the charm that makes the money fly towards the player character, which the effects of I also find visually pleasing, and I had a lot of fun dodging the flying Geo throughout the game. This brings us nicely to how responsive the controls are. Of course, some games work well with slow acceleration and heavy movement, but in case of Hollow Knight, the snappiness felt great. The player character did what I wanted to do the moment I pressed the buttons. Early on I did struggle with consistent pogoing, but once I realized that you just have to hold the down arrow while in air and that you do not need to let go of it, then that became no issue. However, what plagued me the entire game probably was the variable jump height, but that's just a skill issue on my side, as I find the game mechanic to be good. I did however have to practice a bit for the delicate flower quest. That was a lot of fun, but took a few tries. Nevertheless, the best, in my opinion, area for getting to enjoy how the movement is implemented in the game was definitely the White Palace with its platforming challenges. Getting to combo nail pogos and dashes and all the movement abilities felt immensely rewarding when overcome. Of course, that area does not have bosses you need to fight while you move about, but I think that what I said about comboing is equally true even during boss fights. For me, the one boss fight I enjoyed gradually improving on the most, and probably spent the second most amount of time on after the final boss of the game, was Nightmare King Grim, which, on my last attempt I think, but don't quote me on that, I managed to defeat without getting hit a single time. Like, I was fully in zone, or we can call it flow state. Overall, an amazing boss fight, and just as amazing controls. The last game mechanic I would like to highlight one lit up with player controls is a minor one, but made the cutscenes that much better for me. And that is that during said cutscenes, the game stays interactive and lets player input in order to progress, like attacking or just moving the Hollow Knight. Very small actions, but they keep you immersed. Now I'm gonna circle back to ability progression and world design. As the player is gradually introduced to new abilities, the environment around is created to foster learning of said abilities. Moreover, some parts, without containing tutorial texts or annoying pop-ups or extreme levels of hand-holding that can be found in other games, teach you naturally how to utilize the game mechanics. Such example can be found already at the start of the game, as there is a jump that is impossible if you do not know about nail pogoing, or a section a bit later in the game that has pillars of spikes you have to slowly ascend. Great approach to tutorials and teaching the player. What I also find cool is that the game kinda teases the end boss already from the start by placing the Black Temple right next to the start of the first area. It makes it clear that this is what the player is aiming for and guides them. As far as the exploration of this beautiful world goes, I did have a bit of a hard time seeing some of the breakable walls early on, and did have to do a bit of retracing once I learned that there are even areas you can enter without breaking anything, solely by going behind the foreground art elements. I'm not against such a mechanic, as the game does give a map to one of the more important collectibles, namely grubs, later on in the game. I also like that the collectibles are not the kind that some games use. In other words, a visual number that does not interact with any other part of the game and is there solely to artificially extend the playtime. What I hated about exploration were areas that had explosive enemies, specifically the plants that shoot explosives, and early on the large jellyfish that shoot homing missiles after death in Fog Canyon. Of course, I learned that you just need to downward slash to destroy the said projectile in acid much later in the game. Early on, the plants especially felt unfair. Moving on to the story and lore, it was nice. I don't really have much else to say. I mean, I liked the voice acting, or like the sounds of the characters' voices, felt a bit sad when Cloth died, a bit angry at Millibel for running off with my Geo, and at peace when resting at the Blue Lake. I gotta say, I enjoyed the game a lot, and it reignited some of the lost love I had for this art form, even though Metroidvanias might not be the genre for me, as I enjoy the freedom of exploration gained by skill expression or knowledge, like in Gothic or Dark Souls, a bit more. But I do think that gating behind ability unlocks is still better than impassable walls that just block your path because your synchronization is not good enough. So, as an aspiring game designer, the lessons are as follows. The first of all, tight and responsive controls can go a long way. Second, clever wall design can be more fun alternative than walls of text and images when it comes to tutorials. Third, letting the player do even the smallest of actions during cutscenes is immersive. Fourth, giving the player optional harder challenges to overcome without significant drawbacks is fun. And lastly, grinding is dumb, cheating is based. Anyways, that is everything for me. If you wish to support me, you can buy my games on Steam or wishlist my upcoming narrative exploration game, Farewell Lucia, on Steam. But regardless, thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.